Mr. Donaldson, you ready for statements on behalf of Mr. Michael Murray?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, everyone. How are you all? When we started this trial, we talked about the fact that this is a family thing. I said that in my opening. The family here consisted of Edwin Murray, the father, Sheila, the mother, Michael, Karen, and Sonia. And this was a tightly knit family. They cared about each other. They loved each other. The family was limited as far as financial resources. No doubt about that. That was an issue in this case. When Sheila had a stroke, the family pulled together because they wanted to make sure that she was taken care of. We heard from Sonia when she testified that in the beginning, it was good. In the beginning, it was good. Sonia also said that as far as the caregiving went, there was a hierarchy. Okay? What was the hierarchy? The hierarchy was Edwin. And I know you haven't heard his statement, but Edwin, we know from Sonia, is the one who made the decisions. And then it was Michael, and it was Karen who did what their father wanted them to do. That is the way it worked. That's the way it works in a lot of families. There is one that leads and others that do what they're supposed to do. Now, we know from Sonia's testimony the care was good, and we know that Sheila was a strong-willed woman. We also know that she wanted to stay at home. Now, as time progressed, Sheila's health began to decline. And in early 2018, we know that she went to the hospital. And she was there for about a week. And then she went to rehab at Cornerstone. And she was in rehab for approximately 20 days. At the end of that 20 days, a decision had to be made. Is she going to stay in a facility like this, or is she going to go home? Who made the decision? Edwin made the decision. And yes, my client even said that they were worried, Edwin was worried about finances. How would we pay for that? How would we pay for that? The decision was made by Edwin, and Karen and Michael were there to take care of their mother. Now, Agent Pritchard asked my client, what was the routine? What was a routine day like? Now, this is not necessarily at the end, but this is like maybe when she came home from Cornerstone. What was a day like? We would talk to Sheila. We would communicate with her. We would get her up so that she could use the bedside commode. The sheets on the hospital bed were changed several times a day. She was fed, and she was given liquids, things to drink. The family never left her alone. There was always someone that was there. either Edwin, the father, Karen, the daughter, or Michael, the son. We also know from Sonia's testimony that my client has some issues. She, in her opinion, he can't even take care of himself. But he was part of the team, taking care of the mother. They were all doing what they could do. And yes, what he was there to do was some of the heavy lifting. That was his role. He took medications that made him sleep, sometimes until noon. And there, when you talk about what one person can do for someone when they don't have any help until maybe midday, that makes things difficult. No doubt about it. It makes things difficult. But the family never left her alone. Miss Romans was a nurse practitioner that would visit approximately every 90 days. And she surveyed the situation. She monitored Sheila's health. She did those tests that was talked about. And she never saw anything that would cause her to want to or required to contact the Adult Protective Services from what she saw. During the time that Miss Romans was visiting, there was the one canceled appointment. And why was that canceled? Karen was not feeling well that day. We know from Miss Romans' testimony that she never spoke to Michael about Sheila, and she never contacted the spouse about Sheila. She never got in touch with Edwin. Sonia has testified when we talk about this missed appointment. Sonia has testified she met with her mother in February, and she met in July of 2019. She saw her mother, and she stated she did not see anything out of the ordinary. Sonia felt, however, that her mother did not recognize her. Her mother was declining, no doubt about it. But she also said that the family was taking care of Sheila as best they could. I've listened to the testimony of all of these witnesses, just like you all have listened to all of these witnesses. And I have to tell you, in the jury instructions that we received this morning, there are 3 types of crimes. There's knowingly crimes, there's recklessly crimes, and there's a crime of negligence. I have to tell you, in looking at the legal definitions that you have in those jury instructions, please pay attention to them. Because I think you'll find that with the testimony that we've heard, the proper verdict in this case is not guilty. Not guilty of all offenses. Thank you very much.
Mr. Byrd, we haven't got word yet that lunch is here. You want to get started? I hate to interrupt you during closing or any other attorney, but they're not here yet. No. All right, they're not here yet. So.
That's fine. I don't know if we have any idea about how close they were.
I don't. they're supposed to be, but sometimes it's a little behind.
Okay, that's fine. You can start and pick up later, that's okay. All right. Folks, first thing I want to do, cases like this are never easy for anyone, and I want to thank you for your time and your attention on this. You know, there's never a case like this, no matter what angle you look at it from, that's easy for anyone to deal with, and certainly I know it's appreciated by all of us that you all came in here, did your civic duty, sat through all this, gave us your time and attention. So I just want to let you know that's very much appreciated. What Karen Murray and Michael Murray are guilty of is being poor. Being poor in a country where at some point it became normal for families to have to do the kind of calculations that the Murrays had to do. That when it came time that somebody got sick, somebody got old, whenever that showed up at your door and you had to figure out what to do, that it became normal for families to have to scramble to figure out what to do and how they were going to get adequate health care. It became normal for people to have to worry about losing everything that they had, losing their homes, losing, what little bit that they tried to scratch out their whole lives just because somebody had the gall to get sick and get old. At some point, that became normal. Don't know why, don't know who to blame for it, and I wish it weren't that way, but that's the way things are, and that's the situation that the Murrays found themselves in. The reality of it is that people like Sheila Murray, people like Tony Murray should have never had to worry about finances, never had to worry about what they were going to do as they got older in terms of being able to have adequate health care. Tony Murray served his country in the Navy and then his community with the Johnson City Police Department. So he wore a uniform for 36 years in service to his community. And his wife for 46 years, Sheila, was even more important because she was a bedrock for a family. She was a foundation for her husband, for 3 children. And they should have never had to worry about being in a position where they have to put their children in a place where their children are going to have to care for them. Their children who don't have the qualifications to do this, with the limited finances, a limited resource, with their children not having the knowledge, the experience to have to take care of their parents as they got up in years, as they declined. But far too many people find themselves in a similar situation. This family should have never been put in a position where it would end up with Tony Murray sitting on the front steps of the family home, sobbing uncontrollably and telling first responders that he was doing the best, that they were doing the best they could with what they had, as his wife is being taken away in an ambulance. And the depths of how far over their heads this family was being demonstrated to him. It's not really surprising that Tony Murray would pass away so soon after his wife, that he passed away 3 months after she did. Between his own health problems and between the grief of, which not hard to imagine that losing your spouse of 46 years would cause a person a tremendous amount of grief. So it's not really surprising that Tony Murray would have passed that soon after his wife. But make no mistake, Tony Murray, if he had lived, would be sitting over there with his children right now. And a very high probability that he would have been charged with this too. But he passed away and he wasn't. So Karen Murray and Michael Murray, what they are not guilty of is knowingly neglecting their mother. What they're not guilty of is murder, not in the first degree, not in the second degree, not in any degree. Dr. Cook talked about the cause of death being homicide. And I want to make sure you're clear about what homicide means. Homicide, the basic definition of it is the death of one person by the actions of another. Now that doesn't mean that it's intentional. It doesn't mean it's knowing. It doesn't mean necessarily that it's reckless or that it's negligent. Homicide can entail all the way down to something accidental. So know that that's when you see the cause of death being homicide, That doesn't mean that there's intentional action. That doesn't mean that there's knowing action. That's the reason you got all those lesser included offenses that we went through earlier. For example, they all have different definitions of responsibility. Things like criminally negligent homicide, which doesn't even allege intentional or knowing conduct, just that negligence happened. Dr. Cook testified about how the sepsis from broken ankle was the cause of death. And a lot of talk has been at this podium about, what the family knew about this injury, what they didn't know. It has not been shown that this family knew that her ankle was broken, that they knew it before they discovered it and before first responders were called. The family was asked about what happened to this ankle, and they offered a variety of possibilities of this that they didn't know. They said, she had this history of falls. Something could have happened when we were moving her to the commode at some point. We don't know. We've not heard anything to dispute that they knew what was happening, that they were covering it up. We've not heard anything that disputes that during the course of these days we've been here and this testimony that we've heard. One of the problems was that Sheila's declining condition, and you heard a lot about that she had been rendered nonverbal, that she was, Dr. Lawson testified about the assessment that was done on her whenever she came in intake, and that she was just one grade above what they would look for in cases of people with traumatic brain injuries or people that are comatose. She wasn't to that, but on the numbers, she was one grade away from that. So it's clear that by this point, she's severely mentally impaired, that her ability to communicate is virtually non-existent. This isn't the case of an able-bodied person that breaks an ankle or sprains an ankle, gets any kind of injury, and that can communicate in some way. I'm hurt. Hey, something's wrong with this. Let's look at this. The unfortunate thing about this is that Sheila had progressed to a point where she couldn't communicate that way anymore. You heard Sonia Henry talk about the condition of her mother's foot, the lipedema. Same thing that you heard Karen talk about. You heard both of them during the course of this. Sonia from the witness stand and Karen with her testimony or her interview with Agent Pritchard. You heard both of them talk about that this was a condition that she'd had for a long time that caused her foot to turn at an angle. But that's the way her foot was generally, and that's what they knew. I mean, you heard Sonia and Karen both talk about that. And that she had a condition where she would swell. She had edema, that her ankles would swell. That she would wear dark socks, I think, in order to help control the swelling that she would have. They didn't realize that anything was different about her ankle. They didn't realize that this bone had worked through the skin until they unwrapped it that day and realized what they were looking at before 911 was called. And I want to clear up something here because the state mischaracterized this in its first open because this was something that came from the witness stand. It's been implied throughout this that either Karen or Michael is the person who called 911. And that's not what happened. As Agent Pritchard told you from that witness stand that Tony Murray called. It wasn't one of them. Tony Murray called. Now, why dispatch made the decision to characterize this as a non-emergent call or something that they didn't need to cut their lights on, I couldn't tell you. We haven't heard that. Is it possible Tony was in shock? I don't know. But I find it hard to believe that the same Tony Murray who, when first responders got there, was sobbing uncontrollably to the point where they felt like they were going to have to give him medical attention, was somehow nonchalant in calling for help for his wife and her injuries. I have a hard time believing that he was nonchalant, that he didn't appreciate the seriousness of it. So I want to clear up that characterization of this call to 911. State talked about Michael Murray saying that his mother had complained about her foot hurting. And I have to point out that you've repeatedly heard that by this point in time that Sheila Murray was nonverbal. So how could she say that her foot was hurting if she was nonverbal? You heard some testimony, you heard some evidence regarding Michael Murray and some of the mental health issues that he had. I don't know if it played into it or anything, but if you notice in his interview with Agent Pritchard, sometimes it seemed like the two of them were having two different conversations. The Agent Pritchard seemed to constantly have to guide Michael back to what he was trying to ask. And I submit that may have been another case of that, because what has been attributed to Michael as his mother saying that her foot hurt was something that we know from the evidence wasn't possible by that point. And that she didn't spontaneously heal and just suddenly regain the ability to speak and then it go away again. By this point, she couldn't talk anymore. Speaking of Agent Pritchard's interview, he told you the family came in freely and voluntarily, that nobody forced them to come in, they weren't drug in handcuffs, that they were asked to come in to talk about this, and that's what they did. They came in, and as you heard him tell you repeatedly, when asked about things that they said, he said he didn't have any reason to believe that they were being untruthful with him. You know, and I'd remind you that they're being questioned about this roughly 2 weeks after their mother has passed away. Now, you hear what an important person that Sheila Murray is in their lives, and anybody that's gone through a loss like that can tell you the effect that grief has on a person, especially in those first days, those first weeks. The effect it can have on your ability to remember things, just your emotional state in general. Memory can be different for two people trying to recall the same event. State talked about it in jury selection. They pointed out that about going through and talking about what if two people see things a different way. You saw it to some degree here in this trial, because if you caught it, what paramedic Jenkins and EMT Shelton, how they recalled their encounter with Mrs. Murray, there were some differences in how they remembered it. Not because they were trying to be untruthful, but because memory does that. Two people can see the same event and can remember things different ways. Their recollection, if you heard what they said, their recollection of when Mrs. Murray responded with pain was different. It wasn't the same. That didn't match up. Does that mean that they're lying? Does that mean that they're coming up here and trying to mislead you? No. It just means that memory can be misleading. We talked about in the beginning about this, about the importance, taking notes, about a short pencil beats a long memory. And that's why, because memory is fallible. Sheila Murray, you heard a great deal about her advancing dementia, the effects of multiple strokes. As I said earlier, it's clear that she was very impaired by this point. And that's not her fault. Nobody asked for that. Nobody asked for that sort of thing to happen to them. But that's the condition that she was in. And her decline was gradual. That it went from the time she went into Cornerstone, when the family realized something severe had happened, something drastic had happened, and quickly took action when they realized it. She goes to Cornerstone, she gets out, she comes home, and then it's a slow decline. And you can see it in those records that Tracy Romans produced. You could see it. From what Sonia Henry talked about with her mother. This slow decline. You're watching this person that you know slowly be erased because of what is happening to her mind. Now, this was a situation this family was not prepared to handle. They were not prepared to handle what was going to happen with Sheila Murray. They were not equipped for the severity of where this was going to go. They made their decision, based on financial needs, but at some point, as I said in the opening, there was a time when whatever limited ability that this family had, with the limited resources they had, there came a point, a day, a minute, somewhere, where that line was crossed, where they could no longer care for this woman the way she needed. And they didn't even know it. They didn't even know when they crossed that line. Because they're there day in and day out. Those of you that are parents, maybe sometimes you can look at a picture of your child from a few years ago and it's startling to see how much they've grown. because the day in and day out changes. It's easy to miss as you go along. And that's what's apparent here, is that Sheila's declining little by little. Physically, mentally, she's declining little by little until there came a point where this family wasn't capable of taking care of her anymore, and they didn't even know it until it was too late. And Karen Murray didn't, and Michael really, but both of these children didn't really have any kind of choice in terms of what was going to go on with their mother, in terms of where she was going to go. It's been implied to a degree that Karen had some kind of say-so over the decision to bring her mother home. But I think you've heard from the witness stand, you've heard the evidence, that's not true. That your opinion counted in that house so long as it agreed with Dad's. As long as it agreed with Tony Murray's opinion, that's the only time your opinion really counted, because he had his mind made up about what he was going to do, what he believed was best, and that's what was going to happen. Tony Murray was the one responsible for his wife. I mean, that's speaking of common sense, I mean, that's common sense. You know, that's medical facilities, insurance, all that. They're going to want somebody's name to be considered the person that makes decisions about these things. That's Tony Murray, and you haven't been shown anything different. No matter how much we imply that somehow Karen had some say over it, that's not reality. If there was something out there, if there was something that said Karen Murray is the decision maker here, you better believe it would have been put out there on that witness stand. Somebody would have come in and talked about it, but you didn't see that. Because the reality of it, Tony Murray was the decision maker in that home. Sonia, the third child, she told you that she had reservations about this scenario from the beginning. That from the very beginning, she didn't believe that they would have the capability of taking care of their mother. That she, fought with her dad over it. But Dad's word is what went. And it didn't matter what brother and sister think. That Dad, this is what he wants to do. Sonia said she wanted to take her down to Chattanooga with her. And Dad didn't want to do that. He wanted to take care of her at home. But to say that Sonia had no reservations about the ability of her brother, sister, and father to take care of her mother is not correct, because that's not what she testified to. What she testified to is from the beginning she had the reservations, and those reservations remained throughout the time until the end of her mother's life, because she recognized that they were not going to have the ability to handle this. They didn't have the resources or the ability, that she needed a higher level of care. But like her siblings, Sonia's voice wasn't what counted. It was only what her father wanted, was the only decision that was going to be made. And it's not because Tony Murray was malicious. There's not been any proof or any sort of indication that Tony anything but loved his wife and was trying to do right by her. And the proof would show that at the time she came home from Cornerstone, the decision was made to bring her home because that's where she was most comfortable. She was still able to get around, to feed herself to a degree, to walk with a walker. At that time, it seemed like it was okay, that they could make this work, and that she could come home to where she was the most comfortable, where she had spent her life, where she had built this life with her husband, with her children. And her children loved her. All three of her children, Karen and Michael and Sonia, all. I think it's clear. Loved their mother then, loved their mother now. And in that house, you grew up, you heard testimony about how much Sonia talked about her mother for all the good things and what a great cook she was and how funny she was. She was strict. And I'm guessing her dad, a Navy man, 26-year police officer, I'm guessing he was probably a little strict too. So in that household, when your parents told you to do something, you did it. You didn't question it. You did it because that's what's instilled in you. That you listen to your parents and you do what they say. And you try to do the best that you can for your family. And that's what Karen was trying to do. Karen Murray was trying to do in this case. She was trying to do the best for her family with what she had, even though she didn't have the knowledge, even though she might have had her own reservations about this situation. Her dad wanted this to happen, and she wanted to do her best to make her dad happy, to abide by what he wanted, and to try to take care of her mother. And that's what she tried to do. And throughout it, she did what her father said that day when the paramedics were there. We did the best we could with what we had. And that's what Karen did throughout the course of events. And for a time, everything was okay. And you see that from the records. Contrary to the characterization that she only turned her mother over once or twice, it looks like for the better part of a year and a half that Karen Murray was doing all right, that she was at least adequate at it. If we're to believe Miss Roman's records, then it would appear there weren't any concerns to this, that Karen Murray being tasked with figuring out how to do this, that she was doing all right. She was doing an adequate job, even without the knowledge of this, even without a great amount of help. As you heard, her father had a variety of health issues. He was the only source of income in the house. And besides that, he had the kidney issues that ended up taking his life. He had heart disease, back issues, a variety of things to where his ability to help with Sheila was limited. And her brother, you heard some evidence regarding his mental health issues and his inability to be available a good part of the day because of the medication that he took, that he slept. So there's a lot of time that Karen's on her own. That if she needs to lift her mom, she needs to move her mom around, she doesn't have anybody to help her do that. She has to figure out how to manage that. She has to figure out how to get around that. She has to figure that out as her mother's declining, as you're going through time. She's having to figure out how to do this, how to try to get around the help that is unreliable, not through malice, not because Tony or not because Michael don't care, but because they've got their own health issues. But Karen's here having to try to figure out how to manage this. This wasn't like a hospital where you can push a button and you've got a host of people that will come in who are trained at doing something and are there whenever you need. This isn't like that. If somebody needs to be moved in a hospital or a nursing home, you get your CNAs, orderlies, whatever they want to call them. You get in nurses. You always have people there to do that. That's not what the case was in this home. We'll take a moment. I'm going to come back to that for a moment. I want to take a moment to talk about some of the things from Agent Pritchard's interview. He talked about there not being any photos taken at the scene. And I know he gave us an explanation for why. But I can't help but point out that there was never an attempt to go to the scene to see if there was anything, if there's anything that his eyes might have seen that somebody else's might not have seen. It's easy to sit here and call people liars and say, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, without anybody having any proof of it, without anybody taking pictures of anything, anybody looking at anything. What if you go to the home and the bed didn't go anywhere? We haven't seen any of those things for all the talk about this stuff. We didn't see any sort of photographic proof of things as they were at the time, not from Johnson City Police. I know the TBI wasn't involved, but nobody thought to take pictures at any point. Nobody went back to look at anything. Nobody went back to look and see, hey, maybe we can find the gauze that they say was wrapped around her ankle. Maybe we should look to see. Maybe it's not there. Maybe we should go look. Maybe we can look and see. Does it look like they actually bothered to change bed linens? Does it look like there's anything here that they used to treat her? What does it actually look like here? Maybe they find nothing. Maybe it's true. Maybe there is no scene to photograph or to look at. But we don't know because they never bothered to go look. So that robs us of some ability to actually see with our own eyes and not rely on the fallibility of memory what things look like in that house. He didn't look further into when he started to hear something about Michael and the medications he took, didn't look into that. Seems like it'd be relevant to see if you're going to say people are neglectful or not taking care of someone, to look into what kind of medications they might be taking, what might affect them, their ability to take care of someone. Seems like that might be relevant. But again, it's something that wasn't examined. I take issue with it because I think it's hard to sit here and say that somebody's not being truthful when you've not done your own digging to see, what they're saying. Or can I go out and verify this? Can I go out and look with my own eyes and verify whether or not there's anything that corroborates this or doesn't? Now, getting back to the time period when Karen Murray is tasked essentially as the person that has to figure out her mother's care. You can tell Miss Murray's not a physically imposing woman. She didn't have the strength to lift her mother on her own. She had to rely, as I said before, on her father and her dad whenever they were available, and she was trying to do right by her family to the best that she knew how. She, as you heard from her discussions with Agent Pritchard, she thought she was giving adequate care for her mother. You know, as she characterized, it was stupid of me to think I could do this myself. I thought I could do it, but I was stupid to think that. And that's hindsight. And again, I talked about hindsight in the opening, about how hindsight is applying information from after the fact to people that didn't have the information at the time. You hear from her conversation with Agent Pritchard that she realized, I'm sure she realized that day as her mother is going out in an ambulance, and in the time after that as her mother dies, realized, I'm a fool to think I could have ever done this. I'm a fool to think that this was something that I could handle.
Mr. Bird, this is a good place to pause. Their food is ready and set up. Again, I apologize for interrupting, but we'll resume with your closing.